let's face it, the odds of this movie being any good are about 1 in a billion. And yet, here we are. If it's Tuesday, this must be Belgium. What the heck does that even mean? What could possibly be the subject of this strangely titled movie? Well, it's an 18-day bus trip through Europe with a bunch of American tourists, a British tour guide, and a really cool old retro bus. At first, you might think that this will be a travelogue film. That was something that was common the decade before. This movie is from 1969, and in the 50s and 60s, when Cinerama and other really big formats were really big, there were a number of travelogue movies. Some of them were documentaries. Some of them had a very thin, fictional veneer, couple characters going on a honeymoon or something. Either way, the point was to see stuff, was to get out in the world and see stuff, such as the 7 Wonders of the World, which you could see in the film, The 7 Wonders of the World. Windjammer, The Voyage of the Christian Radic, is another kind of cool example here, a movie about a tall ship with some students sailing it around the world or something. I don't quite remember, but pretty cool movie. In Cinerama Holiday, we get to experience a bobsled race from the point of view of Bob, of the sledder, the sleddist, whatever you call it. We also get to land on an aircraft carrier from the point of view of a pilot. So lots of spectacular gimmicks, and believe it or not, this was the highest grossing film of 1955. If it's Tuesday, this must be Belgium. I thought it was going to be a sort of another one of those movies, but it isn't. It's actually something pretty different. Forget about the travel and the sightseeing. If you want something to compare it to, pick a big ensemble comedy, maybe like Around the World in 80 Days. This movie doesn't have the same scale, doesn't have the same scope. It isn't as spectacular. And in fact, ambivalence towards spectacle is one of the themes in this movie. But it does have a similar sense of international satire. This movie is as much a parody of tourists and of Americans as it is of Europeans and the places they live, Europe, namely. The film, it is borrowing something from these sort of madcap 1950s ensemble comedies. Perhaps there's a little bit of travelogue in it too. This, however, is also all balanced out. All this 1950s stuff is all balanced out by a healthy dose of 1960s stuff, of modern stuff. And we'll talk about this a lot because it's pretty interesting. I guess the moral of the story is that this movie is absolutely nothing like what I thought it was. And I don't know, you might give it a spin because it's really surprised me. Let me give you some names in the big cast. Like I said, kind of an ensemble comedy, so lots of cameos. First of all, though, at the center of the movie are Suzanne Pleshette and Ian McShane, interesting 1960s duo. He's the womanizing tour guide leader, and she's a solo traveler, willful, sophisticated, and on the verge of marriage when she returns from her trip. So you're telling me we're going to have to sit through a romantic subplot between these two? Yes. But once more, against all odds, it's actually good, especially once the movie gets going, especially once you get towards the end. It's actually good. Some of the other travelers on the trip are Murray Hamilton. What's his famous role? Mr. Robinson in The Graduate. He's got his wife and his daughter along. The daughter is Peggy Cass, who might be most well known as a game show panelist. Her character didn't want to go to Europe at all, but they forced her to. We'll talk more about that later. Like I said, tons of cameos. Most of these come from people that the travelers encounter across Europe, or some of their friends from home, such as Ben Gazzara and John Cassavetes. Yes, John Cassavetes is in this movie. So is Vittorio De Sica, Robert Vaughn, Verna Lisi, Anita Egbert, and we get the Joan Collins special. Donovan is also in the movie. He sings a song at a youth hostel, and we'll be talking about the counterculture here as well. He also wrote the main theme for the movie, but it was performed by someone else. This main theme is actually great, and it's surprisingly melancholic. It's an early hint that the movie might have more dimensions than you would ever expect. The beginning of the movie actually is full of surprises. This movie comes out of the gate fast. The first thing you see is a plant growing out of the dirt. I thought I might have turned on the wrong movie. It turns out that it starts with some sort of like faux documentary thing that shows this plant, and then in the voiceover, it gives a biblical quote with the ending rewritten to be a joke about tourists. And then you realize, okay, this is the right movie. Mel Stewart, the director, he made a lot of documentaries during his career. He's probably best known for that. Well, he also made Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which I don't believe is a documentary. The documentary influence shows up in a bunch of places in this movie, like the faux documentary at the beginning. Okay, then we get this button of the tourist joke, and from there, we're off to the races with an opening montage where various travelers are packing, justifying their trip, and getting inoculated. This montage is interesting. It has the crisp, almost abrupt cuts that were popular, that were sort of the sign of the late 1960s Hollywood modernism, but it also is understated in a way. The 1970s were right around a corner, and there isn't much music in this section. What music there is kind of the atonal stuff, like you might hear in an episode of Mission Impossible, or like the score of the Planet of the Apes. Also, if you don't like needles, don't watch this part, because we see an inoculation up close and personal. So if you were expecting like the happy-go-lucky madcap opening, you're going to be disabused of that pretty quickly. The movie is like more understated than you would expect. And also, it's a little mystifying why they show the needle the way they do. Okay, needle goes into the arm, and then we cut to the melancholic theme tune. At this point, I was thinking, what am I watching here? What's going on? So, like I said, the movie, it starts out fast. I sort of just turned this on just for the heck of it. I wasn't really planning on... Actually, I became aware of this movie because it's mentioned on a Trivial Pursuit card. Should have gotten the card. It's sitting somewhere over there. I thought, I wonder what this is like. Checked it out a little bit, and this beginning hooked me because I pretty much instantly realized that this was not what I was expecting. Anyway, after the intro, the movie becomes a little more conventional. For a while, it's not clear exactly what the story will be, or if there will be any story. In the end, I was really surprised how compelling the plot is for a film that at first seems like it will be one long look out the window, one big bus ride. And yes, the bus is beautiful, but like I said, is it just going to be a travel film showing us some stuff in Europe? Not really. Okay, I could probably do a sidebar on buses in film, perhaps mention the Serbian classic, Who's Singing Over There, but we've got tons to talk about already, so we'll skip the buses for now. First, a couple more things about style. This movie was filmed entirely on location, and again, it shows that Mel Stewart did a lot of documentaries. Maybe he was sought out because of that, and because he was experienced with wrangling these sort of real locations and things like that. Who knows? Sometimes the production of a movie mirrors the story of the movie itself. Think about Apocalypse Now, the filming of which was a real apocalypse. You wonder if all the actors in this film were ferried from location to location on a bus. Apparently, they spent 75 days filming the movie, and that is a long European tour. Anyway, a lot of the style of this movie, as I was saying, is surprisingly understated, but aside from a sort of romantic score from time to time, which unfortunately they did not delete, pretty understated, but we also have some really flashy moments. I mean, the intro kind of says it all, but that continues mostly throughout the entire movie, and I've got tons of examples of this. I'll give you a couple of them. For instance, when we are in London, we see some wild jump cuts that have a bunch of unrelated frames spliced into them. It's almost like flipping through some slides really quickly. And in fact, later in the movie, someone is going to mention slides, and the film stomps on the brakes completely so that we can see some of the pictures that the travelers have been taking. We get a slideshow, and we hear the pictures explained comedically in voiceover. An unusual mechanic, and we don't need to go off the deep end here, but it does reflect one of the ways that travelers at the time conceptualized and remembered their trips. Think about today, how your phone, how Instagram or whatever, might shape the way that you think about traveling. Well, something in theory was happening back then too, with slides and, old school cameras. There are a couple of freeze frame moments in the movie. These are used more for dramatic effect, like, wow, time stood still. More for that than to evoke like a photograph or a slide or something thematic. There is a scene. This one is interesting, okay? There's a scene where the travelers are putting their luggage outside their rooms. This trip, they have a 6 a.m. wake-up call, and they got to get the luggage in the hall by 7 a.m. How's that for vacation? Sounds great. We're looking down the hallway. We got the shot where we're looking down the hallway, and people start putting their luggage out. Well, they crank the camera here, so it's moving really fast. What's the opposite of slow motion? It's moving really fast, and we see everybody sort of zip out and put their bags out. Not a big thing, but it's another moment that contributes to the film's interesting tone, which is one of the highlights of watching this thing. One more example, there's a scene where Suzanne Plechette's character is trying to drive in Rome, and she gets a little bit overwhelmed. They show this by editing together a bunch of different street signs, sort of shoving these all into your face. like I was saying, a movie that is sort of rooted in the 1950s ensemble comedies, that is deeply connected to mainstream American stereotypes, but also a movie that is pretty with it stylistically, and a movie that also has this like sort of understatement to it as well. Overall, the feel of the movie is pretty engaging, especially if you're familiar with some other, stuff of the time. Let's get to some themes. At first, this movie seems too unserious to be about anything, to have anything to say, to have any substance, to have any truths in it. And I'm not going to tell you that it's super deep, but it's surprisingly deep. First of all, I think they get the travel right. I think they capture something about a certain type of mainstream package travel. Yes, the bus tour is over the top, the 6 a.m. wake-up calls, the 18 days straight. The most obvious message is that tourism is kind of ridiculous, and they get that point across, but they also get some more subtle points across as well. We see, hey, something about this travel is kind of exploitative, isn't it? Both of the people traveling and of the places they go. It's kind of a scam, maybe. But overall, people actually have a good trip in this movie. The film is mainly celebrating traveling by the end. It is worth mentioning, by the way, that there's a few curmudgeons on the trip. The wife books the trip, and the husband, he doesn't really want to be there. He thinks everything in the U.S. is better. This might be a little bit hard to relate to these days. I think the 1950s curmudgeon who doesn't want to go anyplace is rarer and rarer. And most people these days see travel as a luxury. They want to go to Europe. So the movie might feel a little unbalanced in this aspect when people are complaining about having to travel and such. But nonetheless, it gets a lot of these things about travel kind of right. It captures some subtle things. For instance, there is one day where the bus breaks down, and the travelers are out in a field somewhere in Italy, playing baseball, frolicking, just hanging out as they wait for the bus to be repaired. It's a short scene in the movie, and the movie, it doesn't make much out of it. In some ways, the scene doesn't need to be there at all. But you get this feeling that this moment where things don't go to plan, where they can't get where they're supposed to be going, where the agenda doesn't work out, might be one of the most memorable parts of the trip, might be one of the most authentic experiences of the trip. Unexpected stuff and logistics are two defining things about traveling, aren't they? And yeah, this movie, it captures something about that that's kind of hard to put into words. This little moment also hints at how people on the trip connect with each other. And yes, okay, sure, you can say, like, yeah, you go traveling with people, you'll make friends. Sure. But again, the movie, it gets it right in a little more subtle way than that. Seeing, okay, not everybody's going to become friends. It's going to be a little unexpected who pairs up. Exactly the kind of connections that do form, yeah, a lot of this just really, really rings true, even though it's so over the top, and it was a long time ago, too, that this movie was made. Okay, we have a fairly big group here. So some of these characters are going to be simple, right? A lot of them are just sort of one joke again and again. And yet, most of them do have some kind of arc that is usually about a shift in perspective. A shift in perspective, of course, is the big cliche that you hear about in travel. It's going to change your life. It'll change everything. You'll see the world in new ways, right? And sometimes people take this a little too far, but I think the movie gets it right. When we finally reach the last leg of the trip, when we finally get to the airport to go home, you realize why the theme for this movie is so melancholic. Again, you would never expect this movie to finish with such a poignant mix of emotions and to actually do a good job of pulling out all these entangled aspects of mainstream travel. Going back to the structure for a second, they do a really good job condensing this 18-day trip with 10 people on it into a movie that is much shorter than 18 days. And you really don't even notice that the film is mostly just about a couple of people, and it's mostly actually just set in Italy. They also do a good job of presenting the film in English without it feeling contrived, and while having plenty of bits about the various languages, about the characters trying to understand or not being able to or whatever. Of course, the tour guide is British. That's kind of the mechanic here. They've got this little bubble of Americans. That's the mechanic. But yeah, it works. There are a couple even more subtle themes in this film, I think. You might recall when I watched Those Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines. That's not the whole title of the movie, but it's enough for now. That's an ensemble comedy with lots of international satire. At the time, I mentioned that this was maybe in some way part of a World War II reconciliation narrative, getting all these people, all these countries that fought against each other at one point together in this big madcap satire and sort of making fun of everybody tripping over each other. some kind of reconciliation. Well, if this movie is an international ensemble comedy, does it have something similar going on? Interesting question. This movie is actually only like 3 years, I guess, newer than that one, but it's still from like a completely different generation. That's kind of a 50s movie, even though it came out in the 60s. And this one is a 60s movies. It has countercultural stuff in, which we'll get to in a second. It has anti-war slogans from the younger generations, all this stuff. But there is still a guy on the trip who is there to see the old battlefields that he fought on during World War II. He says it was the best time of his life. The bus stops at some of these monuments. Okay. The bus stops at one of these monuments, and we see him talking to one of the friends that he made on the trip and reenacting the battle, showing her, oh yeah, well, we saw the Germans down there, and then we came here and we started advancing. Okay, the camera pans across the monument, and on the other side of the field, we see 2 German tourists doing the same thing. This is a very elegant joke. I mean, this is great stuff, right? Great joke, and also some kind of lighthearted comment on the memories of the war, on reconciliation. Interesting. So that theme is here in this movie, too. Like I said, we also have some counterculture in the film. It's pretty lightweight stuff, don't get me wrong, but there is something here. When in London, we go to a like hip neighborhood. I forget what it's called, but there's some really like stylish cuts, and they like have some like writing that gets, I don't know how to describe it, but they have like some slides on the screen with like handwriting and such that have various slogans. Lots of style in the movie, and also in the movie, the family goes into one of these stores. They brought their daughter along with the trip because they caught her with her boyfriend. They thought, okay, no more of this. We need to supervise you. You have to come to Europe with us. What a punishment. She doesn't really want to go, but she likes the store with its hip clothes and its hip people. The father, of course, vetoes her choices of outfit completely. The salesgirl says, what's the matter? Don't you think this dress looks good? And the dad says, well, it would look good on you, but not on my daughter. This is a common facet of moral panic. Youth would not be so dangerous if it weren't so alluring. The daughter realizes that Europe isn't so bad. After all, do we get like a true sense of countercultural ideals in the movie? No, but you do see the magic happening for this girl from North Carolina? I forget exactly. And you do see an interesting kind of generational thing. Yeah, it is hardly more than just comedy, but it's a little more than that. And yeah, the change in perspective, a door opened to the world. I don't like these cliches, but they aren't entirely hollow. There's also something lurking here about sexuality and travel. You might not think that travel and sexuality have anything to do with each other, but almost every character has something in that dimension, like the guy who goes on the trip expressly to hook up with people, or this daughter who meets someone her age. There is some allure to breaking your rhythm, isn't there? And maybe part of that is a feeling of sexual opportunity, especially as you go to visit these like more liberal European places or whatever. I don't know. For most of these travelers, sitting on this bus is a surprisingly existential thing. One last thing to say. There's a subplot where one of the travelers gets on the wrong tour bus. We got a lot of interesting little subplots here. Most of them are pretty good. She gets on some bus that looks like hers, but we zoom out and we see that it in fact belongs to Bonsai Tours. And you think, of course, we're about to see a very dated scene, but thankfully there's no Mickey Rooney cameo. And overall, this movie wheels from country to country in actually a very generous and warm, spirited way. And yeah, it's still pretty, it's dated, but all this parody and satire and such, like I said, pretty warm, spirited, whatever that means. Anyway, that's most of what I have to say about If It's Tuesday, This Must Be Belgium. The more movies I watch, the worse I become at knowing which ones are good. This isn't some masterpiece, but it really surprised me. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'd probably recommend it. Okay, I gotta go catch a bus.